Lord Illidan knows the way. I have sacrificed everything. What have you given?
Hello there, I'm Fintusius, and today we'll be reviewing the state of the Havoc Demon Hunter in Shadowlands. After being stripped from a lot of borrowed power from Legion going into BFA, Havoc Demon Hunters felt a bit bland in terms of its gameplay. Shadowlands is trying to add a couple of twists and changes from Legion in order to make Havoc's core gameplay more interesting. So let's see what it's all about.
Do what must be done.
While the burning is the prevalent theme of Shadowlands, Demon Hunters, to simply put it, don't have a lot to gain back as the class is still relatively new. However, having said that, they still are going to see things that existed in Legion brought back in some form or another. Let's start with the baseline changes. Immolation Aura is now baseline and generates 20 Fury. You can talent into Burning Hatred so it generates 80 Fury, just like the BFA Immolation Aura. The normal non-metamorphosis version of Blade Dance has had a dodge effect removed. The meta one, however, remains unchanged. This is quite a hit for DH's survivability in Mythic Plus and especially PvP, though your enemies are probably going to be thrilled about that change. Blur has had its damage reduction component nerfed to 20% down from 35%, which is in the end of the survivability nerfs, but fear not, things will get better. Two popular Azerite traits have been rendered baseline.
Impressive.
The first one is Furious Gaze, which grants you a haste bonus once you finish channeling your I-Beam, while the second, Chaotic Transformation, resets the cooldown of I-Beam and Blade Dance when you enter Metamorphosis. And now, time for some maths. I-Beam received a new scaling formula, most likely due to the AoE changes coming with Shadowlands. While its damage remains uncapped in terms of amount of targets, the general change is that it's going to do increasingly less damage to secondary targets the more enemies it hits. You can see on screen the graphical comparison between the BFA I-Beam and the Shadowlands one. It used to be Pew Pew and now it's just Pew. Now let's have a look at the talent changes. Insatiable Hunger, man what a name, has been buffed by a bit, augmenting demon spike damage by 20% and making its fury generation less random by having it range from 5 to 10. But still, it probably won't be enough for it to remain a competitive option. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. Burning Hatred replaces the old Immolation Aura, which basically re-adds the fury generation component, which leads to no change from BFA if you were to take Immolation Aura as a talent. Unbound Chaos is back. At least to some extent, I guess. It's the return of an Azerite trait that was made available in BFA but removed after having issues with coding and latency, which after 4 years is now basically a Demon Hunter feature. I guess that's why they're so mad all the time. Anyway, if made to work properly, would be pretty powerful as long as the demon spawns what it should. On that same row we have Glaive Tempest, which is a mini version of the artifact ability from Legion, this time capped at 5 targets but on a 20-second cooldown. As of right now, it's extremely powerful for any AoE scenarios and contrary to Unbound Chaos is actually reliable. Now we get to the defensive row. Desperate Instinct Blur damage reduction has been nerfed from 15 to 10, while Netherwalk's cooldown has been increased to 3 minutes. Soul Rending also got tweaked a little as the passive leech has been nerfed from 10 to 5%. However, the amount of bonus Legion Metamorphosis has been increased from 10 to 25, making you have more Legion Metamorphosis than in the past, but less, if not, in your emo phase. Moving on, Cycle of Hatred has been changed. It now reduces the cooldown of I-Beam instead of Metamorphosis, which might shake up the talent choices of the row and maybe won't force you into picking First Blood for yet another expansion. This leads me to the new talent Essence Break. While interesting in its concept, it's hard to say if it's going to outshine the other options, but we'll have to see how that pans out given proper tuning. Lastly, Demonic has been nerfed from 8 to 6 seconds. While this is quite a significant nerf as some might get upset about it, keep in mind Cycle of Hatred has been changed to reduce the cooldown of I-Beam instead of Metamorphosis, making you able to have more meta uptime than previously in the end if you were to play around these two talents. So I would assume it's a necessary tuning change to not make Demonic too strong. I can also add that there's a legendary effect called Chaos Theory that could result in potentially awesome synergies with the demonic build, but as usual, its strength will be tied to its final tuning. This should cover all the core changes. But before we move on, let's have a look at PvP talent changes, which are both extremely interesting and, well, scary at the same time. While Solitude and Glimpse have been removed, they weren't exactly used to begin with. Demon Hunters received 2 new extremely powerful PvP talents, notably Cleanse by Flame, which automatically dispels you of all magical effects on you, which is likely going to be extremely strong with the likely comeback of both Affliction Warlocks and Shadow Priests in arenas, as well as Mortal Rush, making your Fel Rush apply the Mortal Wounds debuff on all target hits for 10 seconds. Yeah, Exactly. The biggest loss for PvP is obviously the removal of the dodge effect of Blade Dance in terms of PvP survivability, but man, Pal Rush giving an AoE healing reduction debuff definitely makes me wonder if that isn't too much of a compensation. On a final note, as part of the AoE changes that are being applied across all classes and specs in Shadowlands, this is the complete list of the AoE abilities that are receiving a target cap, aside from some lucky exceptions which might get changed in the future from all we know.
Ah, yes.
Keep in mind that you will only be able to equip one legendary effect at a time, but crafting your first one shouldn't take longer than the first reset. I'll do another video about systems and legendaries in Shadowlands before release, so it's deemed finalized. Here is the complete list of the legendary effects you'll be able to choose from as a Havoc Demon Hunter. The most interesting ones are definitely Chaos Theory, as mentioned before, which could allow for some potential high uptime of Metamorphosis when paired with Cycle of Hatred, Sigil of the Legendaries, which is very reliable and extremely powerful, an overall great choice, and lastly, Fell Bombardment, an extremely interesting effect that makes your immolation aura interact with your Throw Glaive ability, making it bounce and hit targets just like a Warcraft 3 Night Elf Huntress. While it is very cool to play with and pretty strong for content such as dungeons, in beta its targeting system was pretty buggy at times, so hopefully it won't pull half the instance in one cast and would rather focus on bouncing between the closest targets on release. You can see what I mean in this clip recorded by Kibbo.
We will hunt them.
System failure imminent.
Conduits make up for another layer of endgame character progression, but since the general idea is that you are going to be able to pick and choose which one you want to use in your selected soul mine, it should come down to your preferred option. But yeah, let's not kid ourselves here, and what's likely going to happen is you're probably just going to use the ones that sim the best. As shown on screen, there are three categories of conduits. Potency ones are all about ability throughput, with one of the choices being a Covenant ability upgrade. The other two are Endurance, which is based around increased survivability, and Finesse, which stands for overall utility or movement increases. Keep in mind the amount of which type and how many conduits you will be able to use is tied to your selected soulbind talent tree, knowing that when it comes to potency conduits, you'll be able to have a maximum of 3 of them as a trade-off for less finesse conduits instead. When you just look at them, however, all I can say is that a combination of the Immolation Aura and Throw Glaive conduits with the mentioned Fell Bombardment legendary should provide from some extreme AoE potential.
Vengeance.
Since Blizzard is most likely not going to change their minds about the possibility of changing Covenant abilities, you, as a player, are going to have to pick one and stick with it. I have created a tier list that could potentially help you in the decision-making process that revolves purely around the performance in all 3 respective types of endgame content, which are Mythic plus Dungeons, Arenas, and Raids, which we'll treat as more of a single target-oriented encounters. This tier list will have a point system on a scale of 1 to 4 in the respective content, as there are, well, 4 Covenants to choose from, and you will have to pair one against the other, resulting in a decision in the end. 1 point means likely the worst choice, while 4 means possibly the best one. Now, just a big disclaimer. Tuning isn't final and likely won't be even when the game releases. So please, don't murder me in the comments if something happens to change and Blizzard decides to buff an ability by 300%. First off, we have Elysian Decree, the Curian ability on a 1-minute cooldown. It places a sigil on the ground and explodes for moderate AoE damage after 2 seconds. While its damage isn't particularly high, the important thing is that it shatters 3 soul fragments nearby, granting you the possibility for an on-demand high fury gain as long as you take the Demonic Appetite talent. It gets even better with the Conduit upgrade, as with the sigil echoing a second time, it shatters now 6 soul fragments in total, making it really quite powerful. Since the soul fragments also heal you, you could easily chain the sigil in PvP or a Chaos Nova or fellow option, making it in my opinion quite possible to reliably land it on enemies and work as both a bigger stun burst or additional defensive option to heal yourself almost to full with 6 souls. Next, we have Fodder to the Flame, the Necrolord ability on a 2-minute cooldown. When used, it summons a hostile demon that is going to attack you. Once slain, it creates a puddle on the ground which gives you a 20% bonus to attack speed and 10% damage taken reduced as long as you remain inside it. It's worth mentioning that killing the demon will spawn a demon soul fragment, which will proc your Shattered Souls passive for a 20% increased damage boost for 15 seconds. While the puddle lasts for 30 seconds and even longer with the Conduit, it still remains quite situational and would probably feel pretty terrible if the pace of combat would require you to move out of it. So this rating will be very subjective, as it's all about the situation in which you'll find yourself in. Sure, it would be pretty okay if it worked out, especially in combination with Demon Blades or Inferi Totem or even Warrior's Necrolord banner, but it's likely going to be hard to pull off most of the time and quite useless for PvP, as you'll just never be able to remain inside a puddle. Following that, we have the Hunt, a Nightfay ability on a 3-minute cooldown. It's a very long-range charge with a 1-second wind-up cast that increases your fury generation from Demon's Bite by 50% on the hunted target for 1 minute, as well as allows you to blink to a target even behind line of sight. Heh, nothing personal, kid. While it's extremely fun to use, it sadly isn't that ultra powerful, as Demon Hunters don't exactly lack mobility, but the 1-minute bullying debuff in 2v2 is surely going to be quite strong if you were to chase them healers. It should also be possible to have it up for every boss encountered in dungeon, but still, I'd say the other options are just better. Lastly, we have Sinful Brand, the Ventir ability on a 1-minute cooldown. It applies a very strong dot on your target but lasts for 8 seconds and additionally reduces the target's attacking and casting speed by 30%. On top of that, whenever you activate Metamorphosis, you'll apply that brand to all targets hit where you land. Since the Potency Conduit also reduces the cooldown of the ability, if tuning would remain as strong as it is now, it is just extremely powerful and quite versatile, making it quite good in all forms of content as it just does a lot of damage and has an ultra strong burst AoE potential, without requiring any specific talent choices for it to work. Now that I've covered them all, you can have a quick look at the total points gathered by your choices, but again, do not take as something set in stone as nothing is final. Blizzard is trying really hard at making sure that no choice is going to be the best one for everything, and that's with me not covering soul mines and their combinations as they are frankly impossible to cover due to the possibilities being almost endless. My closing words would be that while Kyrian is looking pretty okay for Havoc Demon Hunters due to the Fury generation, Ventir looks like the most versatile one in all forms of content, so if you're worried about your choice and its performance, the vampires are most likely going to be a safe pick, a true delight for fellow edgelords. Overall, Demon Hunters are looking more interesting to play in Shadowlands, as there is a bigger toolkit for potential build and possibilities. At the release of the expansion, they'll definitely feel way slower than in BFA due to the removal of their borrowed power, but in my opinion they'll catch up quite nicely once they have access to all of the toys from the Shadowlands, and don't get me started on the Molter Wounds PvP debuff. While the demonic nerf is a bit of a hit for Demon Hunters overall, I'm positive that in the end it'll work out smoothly if we were to take into account all of the showcase tools that will be granted to you. At the very least, it will open up for more interesting rotations and synergies, while still remaining satisfying and not ultra complicated in its core design. Personally, I skipped on Demon Hunter and BFA as they felt too bland for me in comparison to the Legion version, but this time around I'll definitely have a look at them again, as I just want to have 10 glaives bouncing at a time. As an additional selling point, shown on screen with different transmog sets you'll be able to get in Shadowlands as a Demon Hunter. If you enjoyed the video, let me know which one would you like to see next, and feel free to do the whole sub bell thinking everybody asks around. I do thank you all for watching, as making those videos take quite some time to make, but I'm glad you seem to enjoy them. If you want to hear the full version of the video soundtrack, the link is in the description below alongside my Twitch and other social links. And now,
Do what you do best and follow me.
goodbye.